Eiji Aonuma just dropped something on us. Just dropped something on us that is really not anything. That's what's so funny about it. It's really not anything. It does not actually communicate anything to us about the next Zelda game. And yet, it sorta, almost, kinda feels like it might. You know, it feels like it might be a clue. Basically, he and some of the team from Techno Koei did an interview with 4Gamer talking about Age of Imprisonment. And they talked about how great the experience was, the collaboration between the Techno Koei team working on Age of Imprisonment and the Zelda team. You know, naturally, they were working very close together. Apparently, they were like totally on the same wavelength about just about everything. They really inspired each other a lot, and so it's really fun to hear. Apparently, this really was a very fun passion project. But at one point, Aonuma says, "The inspiration we received from this collaboration with Koei Tecmo may be reflected in the next Zelda we create. Please picture this while playing Age of Imprisonment and look forward to our Zelda." So, it's just, again, it's funny because it's not anything, and yet there is just so much power in these words. For starters, to my knowledge, I don't think Nintendo has technically confirmed the next Zelda game yet. Like, we all just assume that it is coming. I'm sure it is coming. I'm sure they're working on it right now. But I don't know, I guess I think it is kind of funny that it is such a given. We can just assume. He can just be like, oh, you know, the next one. Like, we haven't confirmed anything about the next one or that it's coming at all, but like, you know, it is. But then I love how, like, clearly he knew this would be one of those tasty little news article tidbits that would get everybody all going crazy. Like, he knew that. Because the first half, the inspiration we received from this collaboration with Koei Tecmo may be reflected in the next Zelda we create. That's okay, he's already getting somewhere, but it's still vague enough. But like, no, he couldn't stop there. Please picture this while playing Age of Imprisonment and look forward to our Zelda. Now, of course, I could be reading too deeply into this, but that, to me, it feels like he's saying, like, when you play Age of Imprisonment, keep an eye out. Pay attention to everything that you see, because something in here has very likely inspired some element or elements that we may see in the next Zelda game in 2039. So now, like, we could, if we wanted to, which we do, we could consider Age of Imprisonment to be, like, I don't know, is it a scavenger hunt now? Like, we know that somewhere in there, somewhere in the game, there is some clue hinting about the next Zelda game. Something has inspired Aonuma. Now, I'm not a Zelda scholar, and I have not had time to sit down and meticulously comb through every single element of Age of Imprisonment and try to figure out what it might be. But I do have some, like, sort of ideas. The funny thing about Age of Imprisonment is that it itself doesn't really do a whole lot of new stuff versus the other Hyrule Warriors games. Mechanically and conceptually, it is not very different at all from Age of Calamity, and that's it is a bit of a problem with it. It is a fun game to play, but it doesn't evolve the series. It doesn't introduce any wild new ideas. It really is, for the most part, just the same thing again. So I think, based on what he's said, it feels natural to assume that if something was going to inspire Aonuma and affect the next Zelda game, it would have to be a new element here. It would have to be something that Age of Imprisonment does in at least kind of a unique way. It might not necessarily be true. It could be an element that has existed before, but for some reason the process of, working with it this time was particularly inspirational. That absolutely could be the case. But if that is the case, then we have way too much to look at, way too much to consider here, at least for the purposes of this video right now. Let's stick with the idea that this inspiration came from some relatively unique element of Age of Imprisonment, and that's what inspired Aonuma. Even then, though, I am having a bit of a hard time coming up with too much. If you really want to look at like the stuff that Age of Imprisonment did that was kind of new, the most likely candidate is the Zonai devices, and that's because in this interview itself, they actually mention the whole idea of like switching between different techniques, because in Age of Calamity, you use the Sheikah Slate, the runes, to counter enemy attacks, and then in the original Hyrule Warriors, you were just using like Zelda items like Boomerang and Bomb and stuff. Age of Imprisonment opens up a lot more options, where characters will have built-in attacks where they can counter moves, you know, you send a projectile back using a wind attack or Zelda's time power, or you can just attack a mid-air enemy with this attack that just targets mid-air enemies. But then in addition to that, you could kind of supplement with Zonai devices, the fan to blow back a projectile, or bombs to get through shields, or, you know, lasers or fire to deal elemental damage and all of that stuff. So in this game, you had more options, more flexibility, and you could kind of switch between these abilities and devices, and it created kind of a nice flow. When you really get it down, it feels good to counter all of these attacks, and it opens them up, and then you weak point smash them and all that stuff. And he is talking about how that element of the game feels really good. He calls that out specifically. So, I mean, this probably is our most likely candidate here. Just the idea of having these different abilities and, I mean, I don't know, like every Zelda is about having a bunch of different abilities and using them when the time is right. At the same time, you could argue that Tears of the Kingdom kind of scaled this back because instead of having like this toolkit with all these different things, it kind of focused almost everything down into just like the Ultra Hand mechanics. So I don't know if this just got him like all fired up about the idea of having a bunch of different abilities again, or if you do want to consider things from a little bit more of a broad perspective, all of these Hyrule Warriors games, not necessarily just the newest one, it could just be the very idea of swapping between characters. You know, you frequently, especially in this game, you swap between them. You know, especially if one character's gauge is empty and you swap to the other one, or like, and you're all of these different like techniques and things that you have to counter different attacks. You use teamwork, and then in this game especially, they introduced sync attacks. There's always been some benefit to switching between characters, but this game's sync attacks, it gave you an extra reason to these sync attacks for like extra big attacks where characters work together, and when you swap between them at the right time, it fills the gauge a little bit quicker. So it could be something like that, or it could just be the idea of different characters working together at all. I know that in Tears of the Kingdom, it sort of dipped into the idea of multiple characters by having these like companion characters that follow you around. I am hesitant to believe that we're gonna get a mainline Zelda game where you can just play as whatever character, because kind of like the whole point of Zelda is that you are Link, you are the chosen hero or whatever. But I don't know, it could be incorporating that kind of thing into the game, even temporarily swapping between characters, possibly. Is that what has inspired him? Because beyond working with multiple characters and swapping between them, and just the idea of having a whole bunch of different abilities and maybe even kind of customizing them here and there and using them in a variety of different situations, beyond that, I'm grasping here, and I'm not finding much. The only other idea that I have, the only other thing about Age of Imprisonment that I would consider kind of notably unique in its own way is just having a bigger focus on side characters with their own story arc. Because all of these games have side characters. Zelda games have always been really, really great at having just really likable, fun side characters. And they'll often have like their own angles, their own goals, their own roles in the world. But Age of Imprisonment felt like it might have been the very first Zelda game ever. I don't know, maybe if I go back in my memory and look at all the different games, I'll find stuff that proves me wrong. But it had a few characters with their own personal arcs that I became like personally invested in, you know, in a way that felt unique to me within the Zelda series. It felt a lot more in line with like a show where you grow to like one or two characters and you care about what happens to them, and they've got their own whole story, their own chunk of the plot, and you want to know what happens to them at the end. In fact, if you watch my review, that was like the biggest thing that I got out of the game. The game is fun, but the best part was some of these characters and what happened with them. That ended up being my favorite thing about the game. And I think there's a chance that Aonuma himself felt this way too and was kind of inspired by it. Like, you know what? It is kind of cool to have side characters that aren't just Link or Zelda, and like they've got their own thing going on. And of course it's tied to the greater story. Of course it's like it's a part of the whole thing, but it's still just kind of like uniquely separate in its own way. So that's the only other real idea that I have, and I must fully admit here that, like, you know, this could be some huge inspiration. This could be some element of the game that really inspired Aonuma, and it's gonna have a really big impact on some big mechanic, or maybe just entire like facet of the game, maybe even the style of the game. Maybe it's all about having like big crazy finisher attacks, you know, the kind of attacks we don't get in Zelda but we get in Hyrule Warriors. It could be something big like that, but it also could just be like some little thing, you know. It could just be some little element where you play the next Zelda game and it's like, oh, it's that, oh yeah, you could do that in Age of Imprisonment, oh yeah, you know, like some tiny little mechanical tweak or something. At the same time, though, he did tease us with this. He did go out of his way to drop this on us in that special kind of way that he knew would get all the news articles and Topicarlo videos and stuff going. So I don't know. Could be nothing. Could be a little something. Could be everything. Could be something huge. If you've got any ideas, if you played Age of Imprisonment, you've got any ideas for what they could incorporate into the next Zelda game, let me know. I am really interested to hear if anyone else has got any better ideas than me, because this is it's just too interesting.